if your bank is down, it's like if you can't make your mortgage, yeah, there's going to be a tough day for you, you know?
Yeah.
And we also have very tight regulations from the central bank. So we have to make sure that we're doing things right. And then we have to report to the central bank quickly if something is off. So it's like if something goes offline, we have to be like super diligent into figure out what's going on, put it back online, document, do a whole post-mortem process where we figured out what went wrong, and then report it back to the regulators to say, hey guys, we had a downtime here of like 15 minutes on this specific API here, and then this is why, and this is how we fixed it, and this is not going to happen again because of those action items here that we took it. So I implemented the whole statistic across the company. We created internal SDKs to wrap the whole thing around it and distribute it across the company with our own little libraries and so on. And this has been like a really success,
Sounds great. So you are doing CI/CD. Everything is merged. It goes to production.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's continuous integration, continuous deployment there end to end, We
Yes.
improved a lot our pipeline in the past years. Like we went from like an old Jenkins setup with EC2 instances. Now we have everything through GitHub Actions, Argo CD for doing the deployments, and then Kubernetes at the end as our clusters. Deployments just went really, really fast. We used to have like 1 hour pipelines. Now they are like 5 to 7 minutes. It's just incredible. I was actually configuring the CDN for the applications. And then I configured the whole infrastructure because we use Terraform for everything. So I provisioned the whole infrastructure with Terraform, we use AWS for everything. And then I provisioned the cache infrastructure. Everything seemed to be good, right? And I was like, okay, let's go live with this. I went live, and then suddenly people were just starting to get 404 errors. Like you just open the page, and then suddenly it's like, when you get just the HTML file, and then just like everything looks wonky because you don't have CSS. It's like,
Mhm.
oh no, the assets are not being served. And then I had misconfigured the CDN because it was like pointing to a completely different domain. I was like, oh my God. And then I had to fix it. I think we had like a couple minutes of downtime, and then I managed to fix this. But this was such a nightmare, because it ended up impacting basically every single customer, I was like, oh, that's going to be a nice postmortem,
It's gonna be fun to.
But yeah, that one was fun.
Today's guest is Bruno Paulino, tech lead at N26, where he's helped shape both their platform engineering and now their AI assistant systems. He's led teams building real-time chat support, LLM-based assistants, and scalable web platforms serving millions of customers. And before FinTech, Bruno was in e-commerce of Woom, helping kids' bikes go global. And even earlier, a Scala engineer working on everything from backend to POS systems. Today, we'll dig in how she scales teams, platforms, and now intelligence itself. Welcome, Bruno. Thank you for joining.
Oh, man, thank you so much for this intro. Really happy to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So tell me, how did you get into programming? What was your first steps coding?
This is a good question because I was originally a police officer in Brazil for many years, and that's
I
usually
forgot about that. Yes.
that's
How do you
usually a
get
funny
from
background, right?
police officer in Brazil, to point out,
I guess like computers are more fun than guns,
Do you still keep a gun around you now?
No, thankfully not anymore. Now I don't have to worry about this. It's so much better now. But yeah, back then I was in the police force, and then like the job was really hard, and it's just like didn't pay well. It was dangerous.
Of course.
I enjoyed my colleagues. I enjoyed my work, but it's just like not for me, And then I decided to go to university. As soon as I started computer science, I was like, oh my God, this is my calling, And then I just went through the whole course, and it was a bit of a crunch time for me because I was working full time in the police, and then taking classes during the evening, during the afternoons, or working on the weekends, on the holidays to make sure that I had time to go to university. But once I finished the course, then I was like, okay, now I got my golden ticket. Now I can actually like switch jobs properly. And that's what I did. And it's like best decision of my life.
So now you're no longer like tracking criminals, you're tracking bugs, which
This is so much
should be
better.
easier.
It's a lot better, Our job is still quite hard, to be honest, but it's a different kind of hard, It's like comfortable hard, and I like it. Yeah, so this was a fun ride, you know. I spent almost 8 years there, and I learned a lot. And to me, that's the good thing about like doing something else outside of tech, that you bring all those lessons together with you, right? Like especially
Hmm.
dealing with people, like this, the social technical aspect of the whole thing. It's actually quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it helped you a lot with your leadership skills and stuff, right?
Absolutely, man, absolutely. And I was at the bottom of the chain in the police, so I had to be very careful on what I say, you know, because like sometimes it can even be a crime if I disrespect like a superior, you know. I
Wow.
could go to jail depending on how I tell them they need to do something differently. So it's like that really taught me many good lessons, you know.
What was your first job? Was it in Brazil?
It was actually in the US. So during my studies at uni, I got a scholarship to go to the US. So I went there for like a year and a half, and then during my period there, I got an internship at Embraer, which is like a Brazilian aircraft company. And I had no idea they actually had a research facility in Florida. And I was studying there. So it was actually also like a very funny story because when I was there, I was trying to find an internship and I just couldn't find it because if you know how things work in Florida, especially in the aerospace industry,
Hmm.
those companies, they have lots of contracts with the Department of Defense in the US, which
Yeah.
means that only American citizens can work on those companies, you know. So I could not even get an internship in most of them. And then I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna find a job here, and then started email random people. And then suddenly I emailed this HR lady from Embraer. And just like 3 days later, she sent me an email back and say, "Hey, Bruno, this is awesome. You reached out because I'm actually looking for 10 people. We have an internship program. I couldn't find anyone at Florida Tech, which was the university I was there. It's so awesome that you sent me an email. I wasn't expecting this." And then she said, "Can you also bring 10 of your colleagues with you if they're looking for internship?" I was like, "What?" Then I ended up finding internship for me and for more 10 colleagues there. It was such a good time. And then worked there for like 4 months. Then I finished my program there, moved back to Brazil. And then in Brazil, I got another job in a little FinTech company that was in my state. But that was my kickoff in the world of development, you know. And then my first project was actually Ruby on Rails, which was quite
Okay.
interesting back then. I was like, holy cow, you can actually get a project so quick like this.
I actually had a previous episode with a Ruby developer who was really, really a fan of Ruby on Rails. So I think people actually love it. I've never used Ruby on Rails. What was your opinion on it?
It was so great. I mean, the only thing that I miss is types. I mean,
Hmm.
Ruby is such a great language, but the lack of types and also the meta programming part of the language is just so dangerous. Like once you get dangerous with meta programming, you can do crazy stuff. And I'm not proud of the stuff that I came up with back then. You know, it's like barely maintainable at all.
And in college, what language did you use?
So in college, we were mostly focusing in the beginning C, C++, and then there was Java, a lot of Java. And then
Hmm.
nearing the end, that's where I started studying more like common web languages. And that's where I saw JavaScript, TypeScript, and then Ruby. I got exposed to a lot of different languages. And that's where I was like really hooked for web development. Because when I started learning about front end and stuff, how we can do stuff in the back end, connect both together, it's like, wow, this is crazy. I can do stuff out of nowhere. You know, that was fascinating to me.
That was pretty cool. And in the first job in the fintech company back in Brazil, what were you doing?
I was doing software for POS machines, which are those point of sale machines that that you
Hmm.
usually
Hmm.
pay with the card at the restaurants. And it was really interesting because the whole system was actually built in C++, but the whole testing framework, which is the team I was working on, they were building a simulator of the POS because people would like to write software and test it against the POS, right? But testing against the device was actually quite cumbersome and slow and difficult to get it right. So my team actually wrote a simulator in Node.js to simulate the whole POS. And that was really cool because then every end-to-end test that was written to that platform, it was ran against the simulator. And to me, that was like, I didn't even know this was possible. It's like, how can you create a simulator of like a random device like this? And to me, that was really interesting.
Was this your first interaction with JavaScript and front end part of the world?
In production, yes, because this was actually used, in the company, and they were actually writing a lot of software against this project. In my internship, we had this first Ruby on Rails project that I did. It was really nice, but it didn't go anywhere because then when I left, the team didn't have capacity to maintain. So it's like, okay, that was just like fun experiment. But there was my first, like on the door, let's say. And that was a fun experience.
Nice. And how did you get from Brazil to Austria? Like
Man, that
what
was a
made the
trip.
move?
I wanted to go to Australia and then I ended up in Austria.
Oh, was it a mistake?
But the funny thing is that this part is actually true because I was looking for jobs in Australia, in Canada, and also in Europe. I had been to the US for 1.5 years. I loved it. And then I was like, okay, I want to go somewhere else. And then my wife was also very pumped to move somewhere else. It's like, okay, let's try to find a job. And then I was applying for jobs in Australia, in Canada, in Europe. And I actually got a job offer from Shopify back then to go to Canada. And then I got a job offer from a small startup called Journey in Austria. And then we were like thinking about, okay, so if you go to Australia, kind of like stuck there. It's like living in Brazil because, if you're in Brazil, if you want to fly out anywhere, it's just going to take you hours or days even. In Canada, it's not very different. If you want to fly out to Europe or anywhere, or even to Brazil, it's going to be a struggle. And then we thought, okay, let's go to Europe because there it's just like you drive 2 hours, you're in a completely different world. And there we can try different food, architecture and so on. If you don't like it, we figured out we're still young, we don't have kids. And then I decided to take the job offer in Austria. Honestly, one of the best decisions I made because I went there, I spoke no German. I was so naive because I thought I could learn German in 3-6 months. And that was like a huge mistake. But thinking back, I was like, if I knew how German was hard, I think I would have taken a different decision. But I'm glad about my naivete back then.
Were they not speaking English in the company? They were, no?
They were speaking English, so the whole company was English based. So it's like at the job it was fine, but as soon as I stepped out, it's like, Deutsch, nein. And I still don't speak German, by the way. We spent 8 years in Austria. Been there, worked in a couple of companies. I had a really great time there, but it wasn't my cup of tea. So now I'm based in Barcelona. Life here is just like 100 times better. It's just incredible. I love it.
So what was the job in Austria? What were you doing?
So I started in this little startup as a jack of all trades. They were like really tiny. When they started, they were like 4 people, including me. We were 5. And they had an iOS and Android app written natively. iOS in backend Objective-C, Android was written in Java, and then the whole backend was in Scala. Bit of Postgres as a database. It's like infrastructure as code using SaltStack and so on. And I knew nothing about those technologies. I mean, I have done a little bit of iOS back in school and I was learning about it, but I had no idea. But thankfully, the CTO was such a great mentor. Like the guy was like big brain. His name is Chris, by the way. If you get this chance to watch this, you're still in my mind every day. And I learned so much with that guy because he knew everything. And then he could just like jump between iOS and Android, backend databases with such a fluency that I was impressed. And then I was doing initially iOS, then I switched to the backend. I was doing mostly backend with Scala, and I really enjoyed. And then from there, I went to Voom, which was a different startup. Also great time there. There I had a completely different experience. It was a company that were actually building, a Journey was building digital products, right? Like they were building these photo book apps. Voom, on the other hand, they were building bikes for kids, which if you have kids, that's like the holy grail of bikes. It's insane. Like those bikes are so good that like you buy them today, you sell them 1 year from now because your kids grow really fast. You get the same money back basically because like people are just crazy about those bikes. And there I was focused on rebuilding their e-commerce platform. And then they were all based on like a little Shopify store. And then we scaled out to have like still infrastructure leveraging Shopify because Shopify has an amazing API. They offer this Shopify Plus plan. Might have changed now, but you can have those contracts where you can have multiple stores. You can stitch them together using the GraphQL API. So we ended up building like one single experience. So you can go to voom.com and then you can buy a bike in France, or in the US. And then at the end of the day, you're going to be direct the right checkout, to pay in euro, in dollars, with the right language and so on. So we ended up building this infrastructure for them to scale the e-commerce platform. And it was a really fun challenge because I had no experience with e-commerce. And it was the first time ever, dealing with SKUs and stock units. Like you have to be careful, otherwise you oversell it. And with digital products, you just sell it. You don't care, right? Like
You don't care.
you can have infinite copies. But when you have physical products, the story is very different.
So were you building the entire experience, like from a product inception to market, like logistics, warehouse, stuff like that, or just the website with a cart and stuff like that?
We had already a system running behind the scenes to manage the whole stock management, like purchase orders, all that stuff. It was ran by an ERP system. This ERP system is called Odoo. Not sure if you have heard about it, but it's open source. It's open source ERP system written in Python. Thankfully, I didn't have to work on it a lot because it was Python. I'm not a big fan of Python, but there was a lot of team taking care of this, and then my team was responsible for the whole e-commerce and the connection between them, right? Like they would still have to interact because the whole purchase, order management, inventory was coming from the ERP, piping this back to the Shopify stores, making sure that our stocks were correct. And then I was just like making sure that this whole pipeline worked, so we had those APIs. And then we rebuilt the whole front end to have this consolidated experience, because if you want to have a Shopify store today to sell t-shirts, let's say, you end up having multiple Shopify stores depending on the country. So then this means that people have to go, to then.de or then.es. And that's usually not a great experience. I mean, depending on the strategy. But if you have multiple domains, then marketing becomes trickier, redirecting people to the right place becomes trickier, and so on. On the other hand, if you have one application sitting on top of the same domain, then things are a lot easier to control, right? Like you have foom.com, for example. From there, we use paths to just segregate everything, language, region. And then we ended up creating this whole front end using Nuxt.js, which is a Vue.js framework. That was also the first time I worked with Vue. In my previous jobs, I was just working with React. And it was actually quite pleasant experience because Vue back then already supported TypeScript fully. So I didn't have to worry about types, which was really great. And then we built this front end together with the Nuxt backend, and it turned out to work really great. They're still running the same store. If I'm not mistaken, the team has now migrated to Svelte, but the infrastructure is still the same. They're still like stitching those stores together under the same voom.com domain. So the experience has been pretty neat, honestly.
And how do you use GraphQL in this infrastructure?
So
How are you using it?
So Shopify provides a GraphQL API already out of the box for you to consume from the store. So what we ended up doing was to create sort of like a federated schema or federated GraphQL API on top of those APIs from Shopify. We created our own layer so our store could just talk with one single API and then get information from different stores. So at the end, we built up this thin layer on top of all the GraphQL endpoints from Shopify, stitching them together, making sure that if you're in France, you get the right information from a French store. If you're in Spain, you get the Spanish store and so on, all on top of this thin GraphQL layer. Shopify had just recently migrated the whole REST API to GraphQL, so it was a bit of a hustle to actually like get things running because they're still refining some things here and there. But it ended up working really nice.
So it was just like a back and forth front end layer between your next application and your GraphQL endpoints from
That's
Shopify.
exactly right. That's exactly right. There was also a bunch of background jobs that we ended up having to implement it, which was, if you think about the stores, they also have individual inventories. And then if you think about discount codes, imagine that I give you a discount code that's supposed to work across France, Germany, and Austria, for example, but not in Spain. Those discount codes, they need to be synchronized across those stores, right? With the right properties, with the right regions, and so on. So we ended up also building like a little layer where internal employees could go to like this internal web app that you could log in and then you say, okay, I want to run this discount here for 2 weeks. Get 10% off, and you should work only in Germany and Austria. And then our backend would take this up, synchronize it across the store, and make sure that everything was running. And that was also a pretty fun experience to do it with just TypeScript and Node,
Actually, it sounds really cool. Like if you have to launch a new country, you just create a new Shopify store and just integrate it back inside of the.
That is exactly right. And that's exactly where we took this approach, because in the beginning we had only, I think, 4 stores, but we already knew that by the end of the year we'd have like at least 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just like, okay, now it's just a YAML file. We add it to the infrastructure, the pipeline, boom, done. We don't have to do anything else. And it was pretty nice to see this happening, over and over again, just adding one file, and then you have your store fully working in a different country for different currency, different shipping methods, different payment methods. That was pretty powerful.
And I guess people on the ground were operating the Shopify store, their admin, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So there was still like some admin to run in Shopify. Most of the inventory synchronization was done automatically via this ERP system that I mentioned to you
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
But there was still some things that we wanted to leverage Shopify, because they also have a very powerful admin interface. Some of them are, for example, managing the assets of the product. So if you want to put like really cool pictures and so on, Shopify already optimized them for web, resize them and so on. So there was this piece there. There was also the CMS piece that I didn't mention yet. We ended up using the CMS called Content, which is a German company, Content with K.
Okay.
And I had no idea about them. They just showed up in our radar when we were researching for the CMSs, and they seemed to be a perfect fit for us because they provided also a GraphQL API, with very powerful UI for managing the content, the pages, all the stuff that we wanted to have multi-region, multi-language. It ended up working really fantastic for us. They also allowed us to embed iframes on their own CMS, so we could do custom, UIs for admin inside of the CMS directly. So it ended up being this stitching systems together, that worked really well at the end, and I was quite happy with the result.
That's cool. Yeah, sounds like a really cool approach. I like it. I'll keep it in mind for next time I'm gonna build an e-commerce website or something like that.
Nice.
How did you find it working with Nuxt? If you don't know, I'm a React fan.
To be honest, I'm a React fan too. So to me, in the beginning, it was like a bit, I'm not sure, but we had 2 very experienced engineers in the team that were like really good with Nuxt, and I was like, guys, I trust you. If you tell me that this is better than using a React-based framework like Next.js or something, let's do it. We see. After a couple weeks, I have a gut feeling that's going to improve it. And then we just started pairing. And then like 2 days later, I could see this working. I was like, okay, there's a great pipeline already for middlewares inside of the framework, which is something that Next.js back then didn't support, if I'm not mistaken. So you could do, those header X and all that stuff in a centralized way. And this to me was already like a huge win when I started exploring the framework. Also, like the full type safety across the framework was really great, even including the whole CSS pipeline to process the CSS pipeline and the files and splitting them together. The templates, the whole experience seemed to be like really tight knit, And this was
Yeah.
something that I felt back then the React community didn't have it yet, or at least Next.js was trying to bring this up, but it was still like not there yet for me. I wanted to have more like a Ruby on Rails experience where the framework would just give me all the tools. I just want to focus on my business. And Nuxt.js seemed to be the right one back then. And I was quite happy at the end, to be honest.
Yeah, I think in my previous company, we also had Nuxt at Glovo. We were using Nuxt for the web application. And it was okay. It was fast. It solved a lot of issues. But I think the main issue was that they had this middlewares or proxies. I forgot how they were called before, because we were using Nuxt too. And a lot of logic was hidden behind the scenes. But of course, this is not the framework's fault. It's how we implemented it. We did some redirect logic. We were fetching data wrong. And it became such a hassle to migrate. It became impossible to go to Nuxt 3. Even though they had at one point, Nuxt had Nuxt Bridge, I think, to help you go between Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3, but we just couldn't. It was mostly our fault, or I'm going to blame the older developers that did it, where they use like Vue 2 UI libraries and it became just impossible to remove them. And I think just recently, do you use Glovo?
I do, for sure. That's my go-to food app here,
Have you used the web or just the app?
I have used only once the web app, and the experience was actually quite smooth.
they've just changed it now, and I think they moved to Next. So I think they removed Nux completely, except the part. So if you would go into the flow, you'll notice that the store page is different. And because the store page is still on Nuxt, and it's Cloudflare that is serving different applications behind the scenes,
I see.
which
I
is pretty
see.
cool in a way
Yeah.
how they're doing it.
Makes sense. That's pretty neat though. Yeah, that's definitely a good alternative, especially for doing those migrations, because you never want to do like a big bang approach, right? Where you just like
Yeah,
swap the whole thing out. It's so much safer to do like this. It makes sense.
nice. So how was the next step after the e-commerce? Was it end to
Man, yes, that was also a fun ride because I was at Voom for like 2 years, I think.
Voom was still in Austria, right?
Voom was still in Austria. It was a startup started like at the garage of the two founders in Vienna, and then it grew. When I joined them, they were like 20, 25 people, and then when I left, they were like 250 to 300 people. It was
Oh,
really
nice.
they grew really fast. And then I was in Voom for a couple of years, and then I was like, man, I miss working on a product, where the business is a product. Because at Voom, the product was a physical product, right? Like the technology around it was just like a driver for people to actually get to the product, which makes a lot of sense. And I learned a lot. But I was missing working on an actual product, a digital product. And I was like, man, I need to find something else because I need to get myself into different grounds. So I started like not really actively looking for jobs, but I was like just open for opportunities. And then I was scrolling my Twitter one day, and then I saw this person. Their name is Kitty, by the way. And they shared something along the lines of like, I'm leaving at my job at N26, and I'm looking for a tech lead to replace me. And I was like, oh, interesting. I have an N26 account. This seems to be a cool app, and maybe it's a cool place to work for. And then I just DM'd them, and I was like, hey, Kitty, look, this sounds interesting. I had a look at the website. The product's pretty great. I use it myself as a customer. I feel like it could be a really cool match. And they were like, your profile actually sounds really interesting. They checked my CV or my LinkedIn and so on. Send me your CV, and then we see what happens. And I was like, okay. Then I sent my CV to them, and then they reached out like, I don't know, 1-2 days later, say, hey, we liked your profile. We should move forward with you. Let's just do the interviews. And then I just started doing one interview after the others, like really not preparing properly at all because I was really expecting. And then Sanders, like, I don't know, a month and a half later, I had a job offer. And I was like, what? I had no idea this could work so fast. And then I decided to take it. So I decided to take it. I started there in early 2021. Yeah, soon I'm going to be there for 5 years. And it's still like a pretty fun ride.
Nice. So tell me, what did you do at N26 during these 5 years?
Man, I've done so much. It's incredible. And the company has changed a lot over the years. I'm a tech lead there, which is by definition usually like a very ambiguous role, right? Like the higher up you go, the more ambiguous your job is, more comfortable you have to become with ambiguity. And then I was just thrown there because Kitty just left. So there was nobody else to onboard me basically. And I was like, okay, I have to figure out my job here because like nobody is here anymore in the team to tell me what this is going to look like. So I started to just talk to everyone around it. My team was specifically for platform for web, and platform can mean anything you can imagine. It's like every company have their own ideas of what a platform is. But in my case, I was mostly focused on the build pipelines, optimizing the web application to run faster, to not have downtimes. If we want to make the build pipeline better, let's figure out what are the pain points now. Let's improve it together, because we still have it. We have a huge monorepo. We're finally breaking this down into better repositories because it ended up working much better there with individual repositories. I'm still a big fan of monorepos. I have contributed to Turbo Repo. I have like a open source remote cache that people are using. We're actually using that in N26. But then we started breaking this up into the smaller repositories now, making sure that we have the CI pipelines running correctly. All the caching stuff that you mentioned, for example, Cloudflare caching stuff, distributing the right assets. we didn't have a pipeline for CDN back then. So I hooked up a CDN pipeline on top of all the assets. So now things are served from the point of presence in the countries, right? So it's much faster for the users to actually open the web app, the website. All that stuff that goes around the web infrastructure I was responsible for, so I was really like kind of like a SRE for web, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and because my background was mostly backend and infrastructure, so that fit really well on this role when I joined, because the team really didn't know much. The team was really focused on very specialists on front end, component design, system designs for front end and so on. But the whole infrastructure side was kind of like hanging on the sides because nobody was really interested or like not very experienced with it. So I think I came at the right moment. And yeah, I like to think that I helped a lot there, so it's still been pretty fun.
Are you still doing web platform now?
So now I moved to a different team called to a different segment. We have those segments, and then within the segment we have multiple teams. So I moved to the segment called assistance, and the responsibility of the segment is to cater for customer support, right? Like whatever you think that the customer is struggling with, they're going to reach out to us via email, via chat, via phone. My team is responsible for those channels. And then my team is called live channels because of this. Like we have all those live channels that people can reach out. And right now I'm basically like really deep into improving our chat experience and our chatbot, because it's been lagging behind. So now we're actually using LLMs for the chat, like making it like smarter with RAG based pipelines. And doing like a kind of like overhaul in the experience. We're actually building our own UI for the chat, because currently we use a third party that's providing the chat for us in the applications. So now we're kind of like removing this and then building our own UI. So it's been quite a fun challenge. Now it's very different from the platform side, right? But thankfully, with my knowledge from platform, I can actually bring this back to the product and then say, hey guys, how can I actually build this in a very resilient way that can scale? So it's been quite fun to get back to product with this experience, and then build a product from the ground up that's already like super scalable. I love it.
One thing I've heard about N26, and I don't know if it's still true, it was a couple of years ago, that you guys also use like server-driven UI, like the backend draws the features in the mobile app, in the web and stuff like that. Is it cross-company in every segment, or is just like only customer-facing software?
Man, yeah, this is actually true. We still have that going, and then this is going stronger than ever. So for folks that are not familiar with this, basically like, every screen that you see on the app, it's custom driven by the server, right? Like you can open the app now and it shows a button. You open it tomorrow, it shows like an info card with like, hey, this is a promotion about whatever. So the backend is controlling all of this. And not all products are adopting this yet, but the vast majority are like this, which is a huge win for us, because if you imagine how can you change the apps on iOS and Android, you have to make a change in the code base and then you have to ship it to the app stores for review, right? So this process can easily take between 2-3 days. It has been much worse in the past. I remember it would take like 7 days, 2 weeks to ship an update. Now it's a little faster. It's like 1-2 days, you get approval, your app go online, but you still have to wait for the customers to update the app, right? So it doesn't go straight away to the customers. In fact, one of the rules that we have there is that we have to support APIs and app versions for at least 6 months, because we know that folks are lagging behind and they are not updating their apps constantly, right? So this can take a long while to actually be spread across the customer. So if you drive those screens from the backend, I can change my backend. I can deploy that in 5 minutes. We use Kubernetes. We have a super solid pipeline there with CI/CD, Argo CD there, driving with GitHub Actions, that you can deploy a change to a backend in 5 minutes. And then you can immediately have that reflect in the app, right? Because once the app opens, it requests this change to the backend, boom, you have that. So this has been a huge win for us in terms of delivering features, and this has been in most of the screens or the product features in the app, including web, by the way. So we do this across iOS, Android, and web for most of the products.
That's pretty cool. So how is your backend RESTful, or are you using GraphQL, or what are you using for the server-driven UI?
So right now we have a bit of a mix. Like the web app has their own GraphQL API,
Mm-hmm.
The initial idea back then was to share the same graphical API with the mobile clients, which made a lot of sense. But we ended up not doing this for reasons that I'm not sure. But today we have a separate API for the mobile apps that it's just RESTful. It's like 100% RESTful. We use everything tailor-made for the mobile. We have certain APIs that are shared across web and iOS and Android. Some of them are specially built for web and then for mobile. Honestly, I think that we have the perfect case to justify the use of GraphQL, because we could easily build an API that every single client could consume. But yeah, I mean, not everyone is experienced with GraphQL at the company. So it's like folks also have very strong opinions about GraphQL. Today, I also have strong opinions about GraphQL, but if done
What are
right,
your opinions?
I feel like if you can use GraphQL in many wrong ways. It's like one of them is the building a GraphQL API for your own website. It's like you have one single client. You won't have another client that's going to consume different APIs or like different shape or forms of the API. Why do you have to build this complexity, on top of it? On the other hand, if you have like many services, federated services that's like completely distributed, which is the case at N26, for example, then it's much more sane to actually build a GraphQL API entry point. So then your app can actually discover this, right? Because discoverability is the battle that people are fighting, because they don't know which APIs are available. When you have a GraphQL schema, it's all documented and type safe. To me, that's a huge win, right? So my strong opinion is that like if you're building that for one single website or app, maybe you should reconsider. Just use a as REST API.
How easy is it to get started with GraphQL? Let's say you have like a main gateway app and 4 or 5 microservices. Connecting all of them, I mean, the GraphQL is going to stay inside the main gateway, right?
Exactly.
Are you going to do it actually?
So the approach that we have taken there, for example, we have other services that are providing GraphQL APIs, right? Like we don't want to expose 5 different GraphQL endpoints for our user, right? You want to expose one single GraphQL endpoint. People can figure everything out from that endpoint. So one strategy that we took was to create this federated schema where everything is stitched together from like, let's say 4 or 5 services under one single GraphQL endpoint. And then you have this server in the middle that's always like routing the right GraphQL query to the right server. And then you provide a much better user experience, right? Because the federated schema can be distributed across the clients via the same GraphQL endpoint, but the complexity is hidden behind of this whole orchestration layer, right? And to me, that seems to be the right way to do it. If I'm not mistaken, I was reading this article from Netflix, and that's some approach that they have taken. And to me, that sounds like super logical. It's like, why would you be exposing more than one GraphQL endpoint for your customers, right?
And building it, is it easier than building a RESTful API, or do you think it takes longer, but you get more benefits out of it when you are distributed, like you said, across multiple services?
I think the challenge is mostly like if everyone is onboarded with GraphQL, your life is a lot easier. But if you have half of the way there, like people using REST APIs and so on, sometimes they don't even document them properly and so on. Then you have a lot more work to actually translate that to a GraphQL interface, right? Because then you have to do your own homework to figure out, what are the possible responses here, schemas and so on, and map it out to types and so on. That can be a disaster. So to me, the only sane way is that either everyone uses GraphQL or you stick to a RESTful API, because this is going to be a nightmare for you to maintain.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you ever saw any difference in speed? Because I think GraphQL makes only post requests, right? If I
True.
remember
Yeah.
correctly.
Which to me, that's the main argument not to use GraphQL specifically on marketing websites, right? Like let's say you have a marketing website that's just rendering landing pages and so on. And suddenly a transition between one page to another, it's now a post request. It's like you're just wasting every single benefit the HTTP provided to you by default, right? Like caching, all that stuff that browser does for you automatically. You can have the tagging, all that stuff that comes from the headers, CDN. You just lose it, right? Like you have to come up with other alternatives, which are just much more expensive and difficult to maintain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, like the use case of a GraphQL is it needs to be an application, really like app-like behavior, right? That you are not really concerned about caching or distribution in the sense that you're worried about that SEO, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a perfect case for using something like GraphQL, right? Otherwise, just stick with the plain old REST endpoints, REST APIs, and also like normal paths in the URL for marketing websites, and then you get so much for free that's insane. You know? So the trade-off is just way too big if you don't know how to analyze it properly. And that was, in my opinion, that was one of the mistakes we did at N26 because now we fully migrated to Remix. We're actually using Remix in the main website. And now everything is running as a normal website, like you did back then with PHP.
Mm-hmm.
And the caching is just much easier, like everything is a lot easier to manage. But back then we built this on top of a GraphQL API. And then even a page transition was a post request, so it's like, oh man, is it really necessary? So
Get
we
it.
learned a lot about this and now we have done it better.
And speaking about server-driven UI that we talked about before, so you're using GraphQL, so the app makes a post request to the main gateway, let's say. What does the response look like? Because normally when I built server-driven UI, we would receive like header, then body, and each body would get a row, and in each row you get an element, and then that element knows what type of element it is, what props it has, what action it does, like analytics and stuff like that, or when you click it, what needs to happen,
Makes sense.
Was it
It's
similar?
it's exactly like this. It's 100% exactly like this, and everything is typed. So in a sense, the client also needs to know what they're receiving. It's not that the client's just blind and then can just magically render UIs.
No,
So
it should have
it
all the
needs
components. Yeah.
exactly. So it needs to have all the components there, right? Like all the props, all the actions, labels for tracking. All that stuff needs to be understandable from the clients for this to work. Otherwise, it just doesn't fly, right? So it works exactly like described. So I'm not sure if we can even add anything on top of that.
In the web clients, I'm guessing you build like a factory pattern, right? Like you get the content and the factory decides which element it is. I remember in Vue, you had like component is that you could use to build that component. How are you doing it with
So
Remix or React?
we have a very similar pattern there. So we have a setup where we use tagged unions. Tagged unions basically like think about a TypeScript type where you have a car and a bus, and then both of them have a property in the object called type, and then in this type it says bus, the other one says car, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have those types where they always have a type definition there, and then we have this beautiful switch statement that's just going across, the type definition of each component that comes through the API and just render them. And this is incredibly fast. Usually you don't need more than that. You can have a large switch statement with many components to figure out which type you're coming through and then just serialize them correctly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a header, this is a carousel, this is a hero image, right? And then you render it to the right type. So this has been working really well for us, especially with TypeScript, because then we have like a fully type-safe backend and the front end. We can share the types, right, across both of them. And in Remix, this works really nicely. Even the routes are typed now, so we can actually get types from the parameters and everything that's in the routes. So this is really like has resolved our problem around routing to which component you want to render.
Nice. Nice. Um, I know. And for those who don't know, N26 is basically a bank. It handles large amounts of financial data. So I'm guessing you have to be super reliable to your users. That's why you're on call right now, I'm guessing. But
Absolutely.
can you tell me, like, what's a big trade-off that you made for reliability inside of your app, if anything comes to mind?
Man, that's a good topic because it's really something that has financial consequences, right? Like if your bank is down, it's like if you can't make your mortgage, yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to be a tough day for you.
Yeah.
And we also have very tight regulations from the central bank, so we have to make sure that we're doing things right, and then we have to report to the central bank quickly if something is off. So it's like if something goes offline, we have to be like super diligent into figure out what's going on, put it back online. document, do a whole postmortem process where we figured out what went wrong, and then report it back to the regulators to say, hey guys, we had a downtime here of like 15 minutes on this specific API here, and then this is why, and this is how we fixed it, and this is not going to happen again because of those action items here that we took it. So it's a very like through process that we have to make sure that we follow. And then for this to work, you really need a lot of resilience around the teams too, right? Because you have to build your features thinking about what's the impact of that feature when it goes offline. And this is one of the advantages of using microservices, for example. So we have lots of microservices at N26. And then once one goes down, it doesn't mean the whole bank goes down, right? Like just like very specific parts of the business can be affected, but the overall experience is usually like not really affected at all. It's really rarely where you have a case that the whole app is non-functional, So that part is quite resilient. So it's a bit of a trade-off between having a more resilient feature. So usually like maybe it takes a little bit more time to actually develop and deliver, because you have to think about edge cases, right? You have to think about redundancy and so on, and speed. At the end, it's like you're trading off speed for resiliency. And then for a bank application, this is totally worth it, in my opinion, as a customer. I want my bank to work.
Yeah, that's true. What is the normal life cycle of a feature to build it, development of a feature in at N26?
So
Like
there is
the average.
there is an interesting process there, and that's where I learned a lot about product discovery. Like we have many really great product managers there that help us figure out, what we need to do here, and then why we need to do that, right? Like it's not just like, hey, let's just build this feature because it's fancy. But no, there is like a whole product discovery around it where product managers figured out, hey, how can this feature be better for our customers? How can this impact monthly active users and so on? Once they do this step, we enter with the technical discovery. And that's where like we help them to figure out, hey, what is possible here? We have this assumption, and then we want to ship this feature. Is this possible? Like, can this be done like this? Or does it need to change it? And then it's a kind of like very tight knit collaboration between product and tech to figure out how the feature should look like, because I also don't want my product managers to be spending like, I don't know, a month figuring out how a feature should look like. And they come to me and I tell them, sorry guys, this is impossible. We can't build this. So I'm constantly like with them in the process to also figure out the product and then simplify as much as possible. It's like, how can we deliver this in stages? Let's keep it simple. Let's deliver the V1 of the feature. If you guys are happy, we iterate over it. And we have a very solid framework for A/B testing and doing staggered rollouts. Use this framework called Statsig, which is a software as a service that does the whole A/B testing framework for us and experimentation, everything around this. It provides SDKs for all the clients that we have, including backend, frontend, and then we can easily put a feature live in production for, I don't know, 5% of our users, see how that feature behaves. If we see the numbers showing and then say, hey, this actually makes sense, let's ship it. And then we slowly increase that feature up. We ramp up slowly until we get to 100%. So there's like a long tail of effects there that you usually have to be very careful with. So we make sure that we're delivering this correctly.
Nice.
Especially with the whole regulators around it, making sure that everything is compliant and so on. So you have to be very careful with this stuff.
And I'm guessing you have to have a lot of checks inside of the CI/CD pipeline. I'm guessing.
Exactly.
How are you doing testing, for example?
We have a very solid CI pipeline, and this is definitely like a critical piece of it. We have good coverage of unit tests. Everything is being unit tests like really heavily. We also use, at least on the web, we use a combination of Playwright for a few projects to run end-to-end tests. Some legacy projects are still using Cypress, which is still a very solid framework. And then we run, every time that you open a PR, we run this suite, and we mock everything with MSW. So we have those contracts from our backend API, and then we mock everything based on those types. So we sort of like automated, those contracts a little bit. And then we run in the CI, we use GitHub and GitHub Actions. You open a PR, your changes are tested. Once everything is green, it goes to master, and then we release. So And then once we merge it to master, there's still another set of end-to-end tests that run in our Argo CD pipeline, where we again validate those changes against like all the APIs that we want to make sure that it's working. Because there, it's actually like the services are running in factory. It's not really using the mocks from MSW, and there's the ultimate, green stamp to go live. And this has
So
been
that
working quite nicely.
so the final check is using production APIs or staging APIs?
We use staging APIs, which in our case, we try to keep it as close as possible to production. So all the compliancy around it, like access to data and so on, we make it very tight knit to actually mimic production. And that gives us like a much better feeling, of releasing this. This combined with the A/B testing framework that we have for staggered releases, it's just so much more like comfortable to actually release features because you know that they're not just like releasing everything at once. Once we implemented this, I was actually part of the project because I was in the platform team. So I implemented the whole StatSig across the company. We created internal SDKs to wrap the whole thing around it and distribute it across the company with our own little libraries and so on. And this has been like a really success.
Sounds great. So you are doing CI/CD. Everything is merged. It goes to production.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's continuous integration, continuous deployment there end to end. We improved a lot our pipeline in the past years. Like we went from like an old Jenkins setup with EC2 instances. Now we have everything through GitHub Actions, Argo CD for doing the deployments, and then Kubernetes at the end as our clusters. Deployments just went really, really fast. We used to have like 1 hour pipelines. Now they are like 5 to 7 minutes. It's just incredible. It's really
That
incredible.
sounds that sounds like a dream.
Yeah, it really sounds like a lie because like how can you get down from 1 hour to 5 minutes? This is crazy.
Are you doing anything? You said you had contracts. Are you doing contract testing between microservices or
So we just started experiment with this tool called Pact. I'm not
with
sure if you
Pact?
have heard about it.
Yeah, we've used Pact as well.
Super solid tool. They have the broker, right, that they can consolidate the contracts and so on. So basically, we started experiment with this to make sure that our APIs work properly. We're still like in testing phase. That's
Mhm.
where like some services are already providing the pack contracts, so we can actually pull them from our registry and then test them in CI. But it's still like not highly adopted yet. That's something that the team is actually pushing for it. I'm really excited about it because it's just so much better. If you change your API, if you break your packed contract, your CI is going to break, and then you'll not be able to merge it. It's just so cool.
Yeah, we've used it as well at Glovo. It was really cool. Gotta say, it solved like 80% of our issues once we implemented it. But speaking about testing, I'm guessing you also have being a bank, you have to be accessible to all sorts of product. How are you doing accessibility testing and compliance and stuff like that?
Man, that's a good question, especially now with the European Accessibility Act, right?
Yeah.
There is actually a working group now at the company doing the whole assessment to see what needs to be improved. But at least on web and mobile, we have lots of accessibility tests. We use this framework called React Axe, I think. I forgot the
React.
name. React Axe, right? And this has been really great because we use that in CI too. So anything
Hmm.
that's we consider like to be a breaking change for accessibility, it flags that in CI.
Hmm.
We're also using Playwright and Cypress, to verify many touch points for accessibility. We also built our own component library. So we have a component library called NXT, and it's also built in with React components using. I think we built it using what is that framework behind the CN library? Is it's a
And
pretty it's a pretty popular framework for building.
Tailwind,
Not Tailwind. Tailwind is the CSS part, but there is another
web
UI
component.
component. But I forgot the name. It's super solid. And we just use that as the foundation because they do accessibility really, really right. It's incredible. And then we
React
just built
area is not
React
React area.
Area. React Area. Yeah. I think that's the
Yeah.
one. Wait, no, I don't think it's React Area. No, that's not the React Area. Sorry. It's another one, but I forgot about it. Yeah, we'll figure it out. I'll put it in the link somewhere. But I know that ChatCN used them as a foundation for the components. And it's such a pleasant experience to actually like build anything around it because you basically get most of this stuff. Radix UI.
Radix.
Radix UI, that's the name. You basically get a lot of the accessibility stuff done right, also fully typed. And this has been such a huge win for us.
That's nice. Do you actually have manual QA or manual accessibility testers?
We do. We do. We still have a big team of QAs. They are actually developers, which makes the whole process a lot easier because they automate their work too. They're just not just
Mm-hmm.
manually testing everything, but they're making sure that we have a more solid, test pipeline. So they're building tooling for people to test stuff easily. For example, we have a tunnel application that can be used as a front end for let's say that you are working on a product and then you say, oh, I need a user from Italy that has 500 euros as balance and it needs to have like a card with, I don't know, 200 euros in limit. Then there is like a tool, an internal tool that they built to actually provide you this, in a super easy way. So there's a lot of tooling around it that the QA team is actually building for themselves, but also for the product teams, which is pretty valuable.
Yeah, that's nice. So how's a normal team organized and what's the composition?
We have, generally speaking, usually have like one product manager, a couple engineers, usually like a tech lead, and then like a few senior engineers, mid-level engineers. Some of them have junior engineers too. And then you
Are
have
the
engineer
engineers
manager.
are cross-functional? Like, are they all full stack or
They are
back to
generally
front?
specialized. They're generally like backend engineers, iOS engineers, Android and web. Some teams actually have more full stack engineers, but the vast majority is like very specialized teams. And then you have engineer manager to help us with the whole, setup and managing the engineers, right? Because it's a full time job on itself, and that's pretty much it, And then we have like heads and directors and so on. But at the team
Yeah.
level, it's mostly like this.
And are teams split by domain? Like someone's handling like I don't know how much money you have wallet. Let's say I'm guessing a domain is the wallet of
Yeah,
N26.
this is exactly how it operates. It's like there's many domains, and then depending on the product category, like wallets, like cards, memberships. So they
Mm-hmm.
have this vertical of the product, and then they take care of the whole thing end to end. We also have those segments, like I told you, my segment
Yeah,
called
the
assistants, and then we
platform.
have multiple teams. And sometimes we own a piece of the product, like in my case we own the chat, and that's a feature that like everyone uses it, but then there's like shared stuff with all the teams, so it's a bit of a mix, but in general, it's like verticals like this around the product, and then they have full ownership,
Cool.
which is pretty nice because they actually decide on the features that will go on that part of the product, and they have like full freedom to explore and build new features there.
Any other processes that you have in N26 that you've never seen or heard about anywhere else? Like I'm guessing, I don't know, are you doing RFCs when you build a feature?
We do.
Anything like
There
that?
is actually a RFC process that I got to learn there, and I quite like it. It's not a heavy lifting process at all. It's just they actually call it lightweight RFCs. So I
Mm-hmm.
have written a couple of them. I have cooperated with other engineers from other part of the team of the company there, and this was sort of new to me because I have never written an RFC before joining in the six.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of processes around the compliance piece, right? Like you say, okay, I want to integrate a new third party in my software. Like usually in a startup, it's just like get a credit card, you sign up, right? And then you get the API keys, boom, done.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
half an hour later, you have access. At N26 is a bit different, it's like it could take from a month to a couple months, until you actually have the whole thing sorted out. Like, okay, this has to be through a security assessment, make sure that the vendor actually has the right support for us and so on. And that was new to me because I have never done this, and it's there for a good reason. Now I
Yeah.
understand why you need this, because you just don't want any random software to be together for your bank, right? You have to make sure that it's solid.
Is it only for vendors or do you have to do the same process for an NPM package for an open
Thankfully,
source?
we don't have to do this now for open source packages. We do a security assessment. So I basically sit down with the security team and then say, hey guys, this is what we have. Think this library can do this job for us. So I have like a very lightweight process around it,
Mm-hmm.
and then we see, you check the code. It needs to be open source, of course. And then, okay, this looks good. Let's do it. So it's just take a couple of days to actually go through it. So it's not a big deal. If we had
Okay.
this whole lengthy process, that would be a pain.
Yeah. Do you have any like security champions or something like this inside of the company, or is it that you have like a security dedicated segment that only handles security?
You actually touched on an interesting point because we do have security champions in teams, and one of them it's me in my team, for example. And we have a little framework that we have to put in every repository. You have to put this specific file with some metadata about the team, about who is the security champion, how to reach out when there is a downtime, and so on. So we have a really nice automation that picks it up and then shows this in our CDP, which is our developer platform called Backstage. I'm not sure if you have heard about this software, but it was developed by Spotify, and that's basically creating a platform for developers inside of companies. Usually, like if you're working in a small company, don't need that. It's just overhead. But for a big company, it definitely makes sense to look into something like this. And then there in the CDP UI, I can go there and I can see, oh, Bruno is the champion for this team. His engineer manager is X. And then I can set up a call or something. They can get this information really quickly. But we do have the security team that's like dedicated, like fully dedicated security engineers. And today was a fun day because we actually had a security challenge where we got access to this tool called Coding Warrior, I think. And then
Yeah,
there was like many cool challenges, that was really fun.
that was fun. I
And
used
then
to
who
do
won
them as
it? Of course, it was a security engineer.
fun. I actually won one of those as well when I was at Go, and they
Really?
gave me like a T-shirt with Sneak. We were
That's pretty
using
cool.
Sneak at
It's
the
neat.
time.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Um, one more question on N26. What was the I don't know, let's say funniest outage or bug that you had in production in the 4 or 5 years that you've been there?
Man, that's a good question. I think that I have many, so many scars. But there was one when I was actually configuring the CDN for the applications. And then I configured the whole infrastructure because we use Terraform for everything. So I provisioned the whole infrastructure with Terraform, use AWS for everything. And then I provisioned the cache infrastructure. Everything seemed to be good, right? And I was like, okay, let's go live with this. I went live, and then suddenly people were just starting to get 404 errors. Like you just open the page, and then suddenly it's like, when you get just the HTML file, and then just like everything looks wonky because you don't have CSS. It's like,
Mhm.
oh no, the assets are not being served. And then I had misconfigured the CDN because it was like pointing to a completely different domain. I was like, oh my God. And then I had to fix it. I think we had like a couple minutes of downtime, and then I managed to fix this. But this was such a nightmare, because it ended up impacting basically every single customer. I was like, oh
Mm.
shit, that's going to be a nice postmortem.
It's gonna be fun to.
um, but yeah, that one was fun.
That was pretty cool. Well, not cool, but
Yeah,
cool
good
to
experience,
tell.
a good
It's a
learning,
it's a good story. It's a good story.
a good learning experience. Back then, we didn't have the proper experimentation framework that we have now. So it's like it was either one or nothing. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, today would have been much easier. I could just enable that for my user, and then I would only be the one having downtime.
Nice. Final questions. These are all about you. What are some favorite books that you like to recommend to my readers to read, my listeners?
Man, tech books or
Tech
any book in
or
general.
any book, but I would like a tech book as well because I
Mm-hmm.
like to order a lot of tech books.
I'm reading one now, and I haven't finished reading yet. It's called AI Engineering by, what is the name of the author? She's brilliant. Engineering book. Let me check. The book is just so good, so well written. And AI Engineering, building applications for foundation with foundational
Models.
models. And this book, it's been really, really great. The author is called Chip Huyen. I'm probably
Oh yeah.
yeah, probably speaking it wrong here, but the book is really great because it really focused, like there's a lot of hype around AI right now, right?
Yeah.
And every day there's like new tools, and then every day new tools die too. But this book is really good because it focuses on the foundations, right? Like the stuff that it won't change at least in the next 5-10 years. Really shows you how LM works, how you can approach initiatives around it, the risks, the weaknesses, the strengths. So to me, that seems like if you want to learn about AI and then leverage this knowledge in a good way, like this is a go-to book to actually have a good foundation. From there, then you can play with APIs and do whatever. But this is the solid foundation that you want to take.
Mm-hmm.
So highly recommend this book. Really, it's really great. The other book that I finished a couple months ago was the Writing Your Own Interpreting Go. That was also a fun one. I actually have to update my Goodreads because Writing and Interpreting Go is really a cool book if you're into programming languages, which is my case. Like on my spare time, I just like to learn about programming languages and so on. And this guy, brilliant guy, Thorsten Ball, he works at SourceGraph. He just creates this full programming language from scratch, and then you build the whole thing in Go. I wanted to learn Go. I still didn't learn it, by the way. I still suck at it, but it's been a pretty fun ride. And then he builds this whole language called Monkey. So you actually write a file called main.monkey, and then you have your own syntax and so on. It's pretty great to actually learn how, like a runtime works or how interpreted language work. And it's just so valuable for any engineer, even if you're not interested in creating programming languages and so on. Like the amount of knowledge that you get about how those things work is just insane. Just like really understanding how Node.js works, right? Like how the whole JavaScript runtime works and so on. To me, that's just such a level of knowledge that you have to be a great engineer. That's like books like this will show you, how this stuff is done. And it's really incredible.
Nice. And what one that's not technical, what would you recommend?
Man, what was the last non-technical book that I read? Let me check. I have my list here. Okay. Oh, Rust Atomics is also really great. But if you're not into Rust, then forget about it. The other one that I read, it was non-technical, but it was really great. It was called The Bullshit Jobs, A Theory. And this book is really interesting.
What's it called? Sorry.
The title is Bullshit Jobs, A Theory.
Bullshit Jobs.
Yeah.
Theory.
It's a book around explaining why we have so many jobs today that don't even make sense. It's like, why does this exist? And I won't spoil it. It's a very interesting read, and most of it really makes sense. So I highly recommend, for you to give it a read, because you're gonna think about us like how this job exists and how this person makes a year.
That sounds interesting. Cool. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you for coming on my podcast. It was a really cool thing. I think we learned a lot. GraphQL, server-driven UI, FinTech as a whole. Thank you. You've shared so much insight and knowledge. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for having me. That was really a fun chat. Looking forward to see the next podcast too, because I'm a follower of the podcast. So I'm always like watching what's happening at Señors Scale. So looking forward to catch up more often. And we see each other around.
See each other. Let's have a beer.
Thanks, man.